No daughter of mine needs an education. My father said that, then ripped my college acceptance letter in half, right there at the dinner table. Penn State, full scholarship. 9 months of secret applications destroyed in 5 seconds. I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. 30 seconds later, my grandmother pulled out a piece of paper my father had never seen. The deed to his house. Except it wasn't his house at all. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 27 years old now, but this story starts when I was 17, living in a 2-story brick house on Maple Street in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in a home that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a prison on the inside. The house had white shutters that my father painted every spring, a lawn he mowed every Saturday morning at exactly 7:15. Not because he enjoyed it, but because he needed the neighbors to see him doing it. Image mattered to Gerald Mitchell. Control mattered more. Inside that house, every square inch operated on his terms. The thermostat stayed at 64 degrees in winter because anything higher was wasteful, he said, even when my younger brother Danny and I could see our breath in our bedrooms on January mornings. The television remote lived on the armrest of his recliner, his channel, his schedule. Dinner was served at 6 o'clock sharp, and God help you if the salt shaker wasn't on his side of the table. That table was a heavy oak dining table with carved legs and a water stain shaped like a crescent moon near the corner where I always sat. My grandmother had bought it when she first furnished the house 22 years ago, back when my grandfather was still alive. But my father called it my table the same way he called everything in that house my this and my that. This is my house, my rules. I heard that sentence every week, sometimes twice. Sometimes before breakfast. The house on Maple Street had been in our family since I was born, and for 17 years I believed what my father told everyone who'd listen. That he'd worked himself to the bone to provide this home for his family, that every nail and shingle was there because of his sacrifice. It wasn't until that Sunday dinner, the one where everything fell apart, that I learned the truth. My father had never owned a single nail in that house. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the fall of my senior year when I was 17 and still believed that if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, my father might one day look at me and see something worth keeping. I was 10 years old the first time my father handed me a spatula and told me to make eggs. It was 3 months after my mother died, breast cancer, Stage 4, gone before the tulips she planted came up in the spring. I burned those eggs. The yolks broke and ran across the pan like something wounded. My father didn't yell. He just stared at me with this flat, empty look that was somehow worse than yelling and said, "Your mother could do this in her sleep. Figure it out." So I figured it out. Eggs first, then pancakes, then full dinners, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the rotation he liked. I did the laundry every Monday and Thursday. I scrubbed the bathroom tile on my knees every Wednesday. I packed my little brother Danny's lunch every morning and walked him to the bus stop. I wasn't his daughter. I was his housekeeper, his cook, his live-in domestic staff. I just didn't have the words for it yet. My mother's name was Catherine. She had brown hair that curled at the ends without trying, and a laugh that made you feel like you were in on some wonderful secret. I was 8 years old when she died, and those are the 2 details I've held onto tightest, the hair and the laugh, because my father made sure I didn't have much else to remember her by. After the funeral, he moved through the house like a man boarding up windows before a storm. First the photos came down. Every picture of my mother, off the walls, off the fridge, off the mantle, packed into a cardboard box and shoved into the garage behind the lawnmower. I snuck one out when he wasn't looking. A small snapshot of her holding me at the county fair, cotton candy stuck to my chin, both of us laughing. I kept it pressed inside my biology textbook, like a secret I was smuggling through security. Then the rules tightened. No mentioning Mom at the table. No crying where he could see it. No asking when things would feel normal again, because apparently normal was whatever Gerald Mitchell decided it was on any given day. Your mother had dreams too, he said to me once when I was 12 and made the mistake of telling him I wanted to be a teacher someday. Look where that got her. He said it the way you'd comment on the weather. Just the fact. Like dying was something she'd done on purpose to inconvenience him. I found out years later from my grandmother, in a sentence she started and then stopped, looking away, that my father had forbidden my mother from going back to school. Catherine had wanted to finish her teaching degree. She'd been 2 semesters away from her bachelor's when she got pregnant with me. My father said no. A wife's place is at home, he'd told her. She stayed. That was the first time I understood that silence in our family wasn't peace. It was obedience. My daily routine was simple the way a cage is simple once you stop rattling the bars. 5:30 alarm. 5:45. Downstairs, coffee started, eggs on the skillet. Gerald. I started calling him that in my head around age 15, though never out loud. Liked his coffee black with exactly 1 sugar. If I forgot the sugar, he'd push the mug to the center of the table without a word and wait for me to fix it. 6:15. Danny's lunch packed, his backpack by the door. 6:30. Gerald's lunch packed too, because apparently a 49-year-old man couldn't manage a sandwich. 7. Bus stop with Danny. 7:40. School. 3 o'clock. Home. 3:15. Dishes from the morning. Laundry if it was Monday or Thursday. Vacuuming if it was Wednesday. 5:30. Start dinner. 6. Serve. 6:45. Clear the table. Wash everything by hand, because Gerald said the dishwasher wasted water. 8. Homework. Finally. 9:30 or later. Bed if I was lucky. He checked the fridge to make sure I'd shopped correctly. He checked my phone, a flip phone so old the hinge was held together with tape, to make sure I wasn't wasting time. He didn't allow extracurriculars. No clubs, no sports, no friends over. You've got responsibilities, he'd say. Like I was 40 with a mortgage instead of 17 with a geometry test the next morning. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I leave? Why didn't I call someone, tell a teacher, go to my grandmother's house and refuse to come back? Here's why. I was 17. I had $32 in a mason jar under my bed. I couldn't sign a lease, couldn't open a bank account, couldn't enroll myself in school without a guardian's signature. My Uncle Paul was too scared of Gerald to take me in. I'd asked once, got a long silence and an apology. And if I fought back, if I made noise, if I caused problems, Gerald had one threat that silenced everything. Keep it up and I'll make sure your grandmother never sees you again. She was the only person left who made me feel like a person instead of a function. So I stayed quiet. I stayed useful. I stayed. Before I go any further, I need to know something from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this from. Your city, your state, your country, because what I'm about to tell you about family control and the secrets people keep behind closed doors, this is happening everywhere. And I want to know how far this story reaches. That September, something arrived in the mail that changed everything. And it almost didn't reach me. Here's something Gerald didn't know. I'd applied to college. Not openly, not proudly, in secret, like I was planning a crime. It started with Mrs. Kowalski, my school counselor, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a file cabinet she called the vault. She noticed things. The way I flinched when someone raised their voice in the hallway. The way I never stayed after school. Never signed up for anything. Always rushed home like I had a bomb ticking down in my backpack. One afternoon in January of my junior year, she asked me to stay after our meeting about course selection. She closed her office door and said, "Sarah, what do you want to do with your life?" No one had ever asked me that. Not once. Not ever. She helped me with everything. SAT prep books she lent from her own shelf. Application fee waivers she knew how to get. Essay drafts I wrote during lunch in her office with the door closed. My handwriting shaking, because I was terrified someone would find out. We used the school's address for all correspondence because Gerald checked the mailbox every single day like a warden checking cells. But I also told my grandmother. One evening, I called Eleanor from the phone in Mrs. Kowalski's office and told her everything. The applications, the essays, the dream I'd been hiding like contraband. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Use my address as a backup, sweetheart. I'll watch for any letters that come." It was Eleanor who got the letter first. Penn State. Accepted. Partial scholarship. $14,000 a year. I'd need about $9,000 more for tuition and living expenses, but it was real. It was possible. It was mine. I cried in Mrs. Kowalski's office when Eleanor called to tell me. Quiet tears, the kind I trained myself to cry over the years. No sound, no mess, no evidence. "Don't worry about the money," my grandmother said on the phone, her voice steady and sure. "And don't worry about the house. Just trust Grandma." I didn't understand the part about the house. Not yet. Eleanor told me to bring the letter to Sunday dinner. She'd be there. "Bring it," she said, "and let me handle the rest." What I didn't know, what made my stomach drop when I found out later, was that Gerald had already gone behind my back. He'd contacted Ruby's Diner on Route 30 and arranged a job for me starting the week after graduation. Waitressing. 30 hours a week, $8.50 an hour. He'd even filled out the application himself, signed my name in his own handwriting. He wasn't just keeping me from college. He was building a wall around my entire future, brick by brick, while I was still standing inside it. Sunday dinner. 6 o'clock. I set the table the way I always did. Gerald's plate at the head. His water glass on the right. His napkin folded into a rectangle, because he said triangles looked sloppy. Danny's place to his left. Uncle Paul across from Danny. My grandmother's chair at the other end, nearest the kitchen, where she always sat. Close to the door, I realized later, like someone who always kept an exit in sight. I'd cooked the usual rotation. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with garlic. Gerald's menu. Gerald's schedule. Gerald's rules. The smell of rosemary filled the kitchen. And I remember thinking how strange it was that something could smell like home and feel like a trap at the same time. Eleanor arrived at 5:45. She wore her camel-colored wool coat, the one nice thing she owned, the one she wore to every family dinner like it was armor. She kissed my forehead at the door, squeezed my hand once, and set her leather handbag, structured, dark brown, worn soft at the handles, on the floor beside her chair. I didn't notice how carefully she placed it. Didn't notice it was heavier than usual. Gerald was in a good mood. That should have been my first warning. He came downstairs whistling, clapped Danny on the shoulder, even said "smells good" as he sat down, a compliment so rare I almost dropped the serving spoon. I knew why he was cheerful. He thought that next week I'd be filling ketchup bottles at Ruby's Diner. His plan was working. My plan was tucked under my seat cushion in a sealed envelope. I waited until everyone had their plates. Until Gerald took his first bite of chicken and nodded the way he did when the food met his standards. Until the table settled into that quiet rhythm of forks on plates and ice clinking in glasses. Then I pulled out the envelope. "Dad," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. I got accepted to Penn State. With a scholarship. I held the envelope out to him like an offering. Like a child showing a drawing to a parent and praying they'll put it on the fridge. Gerald set down his fork. He looked at the envelope the way you'd look at roadkill. with a kind of distant, vaguely offended curiosity. He took it, pulled the letter out, read it slowly, his eyes tracking left to right, his jaw tightening with each line. Then his face went red. Not angry red, darker, the red of something that's been pressurized too long. He tore the letter in half. The sound, that clean, sharp rip, cut through the kitchen louder than any shout. He tore it again, for pieces. Then he dropped them onto his plate, right next to the chicken bones and the smear of mashed potatoes. No daughter of mine needs an education, he said. Not yelling. Worse. Level. Absolute. Like he was reading scripture. You're staying right here. He looked around the table. At Danny, who was staring at his plate like it might tell him what to do. At Uncle Paul, who suddenly found his green beans fascinating. At Eleanor, who hadn't moved. Nobody encourages this nonsense, Gerald said. She's got a job at Ruby starting next month. That's the end of it. I looked down at the pieces of my letter. 9 months of work. Late nights in Mrs. Kowalski's office. The essay I'd rewritten 11 times. The SAT I'd studied for using a prep book with someone else's notes in the margins. All of it sitting on a dinner plate, soaking in gravy. Then Gerald leaned back in his chair and said the thing I will never forget. Your mother had the same stupid ideas. Wanted to go back to school, be a teacher. He picked up his fork again, stabbed a piece of chicken. And where is she now? The table went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. He'd turned my mother's death into a weapon. Again, I wanted to cry. But I knew. The way you know fire is hot, the way you know ice is cold, that crying in front of Gerald meant losing. So I swallowed it, sat there with my hands flat on my lap, and swallowed it whole. Gerald wasn't done. He turned to my grandmother, who was sitting perfectly still at the end of the table, her hands resting on either side of her plate, her face unreadable in that way she had, like a door that's closed but not locked. This is your doing, isn't it? He said, pointing his fork at her like a weapon, filling her head with ideas. You've always coddled her, just like you coddled Catherine. He said my mother's name like it tasted sour. And look how that turned out. Eleanor said nothing, didn't blink, didn't move, just sat there in her camel coat with her hands perfectly still. Clear the table, Sarah, Gerald said without looking at me. Now, this conversation is over. I stood up. Reflex. 9 years of muscle memory carrying me toward the sink before my brain could catch up. My hands were already reaching for his plate when I heard my grandmother's voice. Sit down, Sarah. Quiet. Not loud. But something in it stopped me cold. A firmness I'd never heard from her before. Like a door locking from the inside. Gerald's eyes snapped to Eleanor. Ma, stay out of this. This is my house. My daughter. My decision. Uncle Paul shifted in his seat. Gerald, maybe we should talk about this. You don't get a vote either. Gerald cut in without breaking eye contact with Eleanor. Then he turned back to me. And while we're at it, I called Penn State on Thursday. Tried to withdraw your application myself. Told them I was your father, your guardian. His lip curled. They said they needed your signature. Some policy nonsense. He leaned forward. So you're going to sign that withdrawal form tonight. Right here at this table. In front of everyone. That was his real plan. Not just destroying the letter. He wanted me to kill my own future with my own hand. Witnessed by my own family. A public execution of the only dream I had left. My grandmother sat still for exactly 30 seconds. I know because I was counting. 30 seconds is longer than you think when the only sound is the clock ticking and your own heartbeat and the faint scrape of Gerald's fork against porcelain because he'd actually gone back to eating. That confident he'd won. 1 Mississippi. The refrigerator hummed. 10 Mississippi. Danny stared at the torn pieces of my letter like he was trying to put them back together with his mind. 20 Mississippi. Uncle Paul's hand was wrapped around his water glass so tight his knuckles were white. 30. My grandmother set her napkin down, folded it neat and precise, placed it to the right of her plate the way she always did, like even this small act deserved dignity. Then she pushed her chair back and stood up. She moved slowly, not frail, deliberate, walked to the coat closet by the front door and took out her camel coat, put it on one arm at a time, buttoned it at the waist with steady hands. Gerald looked up from his plate. Where are you going? Dinner's not over. Eleanor walked back to the table, stood behind her chair, looked at my father, not through him, not past him, but directly at him. The way you look at someone you finally stopped making excuses for. And she said 2 words, pack her bags. Gerald laughed. A big laugh. A real laugh. The kind that comes from the belly and fills a room. The laugh of a man who believes the world is organized exactly the way he arranged it. Pack her bags, he repeated, still grinning. And send her where? With what money? My grandmother didn't answer. She reached down, unclasped her leather handbag, and pulled out a stack of papers held together with a single paper clip. What she put on the table was the reason my father had been living like a king in a castle that was never his. It was a deed, a property deed, notarized, stamped, filed with the county recorder's office, every line crisp, every signature verified, and at the top, in black ink that 22 years hadn't faded, one name, Eleanor Margaret Mitchell. Sole owner, not Gerald and Eleanor, not the Mitchell Family Trust, just her. One name, one woman, one signature. This house has been in my name since 2004, Eleanor said. Her voice didn't waver. I bought it with your father's life insurance money and my savings after he passed. I let you live here rent-free because you were grieving and you had 2 children who needed a roof. She paused. But I never, not once, signed this house over to you, Gerald. There is no transfer. There is no agreement. The deed is mine. It has always been mine. Gerald's smile collapsed. Not all at once. It went in stages, like a building losing floors. First the corners of his mouth, then the light in his eyes, then his entire posture, sinking an inch in the chair he'd been sitting in like a throne. He looked at the deed. He looked at Eleanor. Then he forced out a laugh. Smaller this time. Thinner. The laugh of a man looking for the punchline. So what, he said. You're going to kick me out? Your own son. I'm giving you a choice, Eleanor said. Sarah goes to Penn State this fall with my financial support. You let her go. You support her decision. And you keep living here. She tilted her chin slightly. Or you fight this, and I call my attorney tonight. Uncle Paul leaned forward and picked up the deed, started reading it. His eyebrows climbed his forehead. He set it down without a word, but the look he gave Gerald was one I'd never seen from him before. Something between shock and a quiet, long overdue recognition. Danny's mouth was open. He was looking at me, then at Eleanor, then back at me like he was watching the world rearrange itself in real time. And me. I sat there staring at that piece of paper, and one thought repeated itself over and over. 22 years. He told us this was his house. He made every rule, controlled every corner, decided who ate, who spoke, who mattered. All of it built on a lie he'd never bothered to verify. Gerald's face cycled through something I had never seen before. Confusion, then fury, then a hard, brittle composure, like a man patching a cracked wall with his bare hands. He pushed the deed to the side of the table. You think a piece of paper scares me, he said. I've been maintaining this house for 20 years. 20. I paid the electric, the water, the gas. I fixed the roof when it leaked. I replaced the furnace in 2019. He jabbed his finger against the table. I put my sweat into these walls. You think any court would just hand it to you? He was reaching. I could see it. Building a case the way he built everything. loud and fast, hoping no one would check the foundation. Eleanor didn't respond. She stood there in her camel coat, hands clasped in front of her, and let him talk. "And even if the house is yours, Ma," Gerald spread his hands wide like he was being reasonable, like this was all just a misunderstanding between adults. "I'll fight it. I'll get a lawyer. You really want to drag your own family to court?" That was his card. Guilt. The same tool he'd used on me for 9 years. On my mother before that. Probably on Eleanor before that. The threat wasn't legal. It was emotional. "You'll be the one who broke this family." Then he turned to me. His voice dropped. Low. Almost gentle. The way a trap sounds when it's being set. "Tell your grandmother to stop this, Sarah. You know this is your home. You want to destroy this family over a school." He wanted me to choose. Family or future. Loyalty or freedom. The same impossible choice he'd been forcing on every woman in his life for as long as I could remember. My grandmother didn't argue. Didn't raise her voice. She reached into her handbag again. Pulled out a cell phone. Not a smartphone. A simple flip phone. Old, silver, small. Almost identical to the one Gerald had given me. The one he tracked and monitored. But Eleanor's was hers. Paid for with her own money. Listed under her own name. She pressed one button. Speed dial. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the tiny ringing through the speaker. One ring. 2 rings. Then a click. "Hello, David. It's Eleanor Mitchell." Her voice was conversational. Almost pleasant. Like she was confirming a lunch reservation. "I need you to begin the process we discussed." "Yes, the 30-day notice." A pause. "Yes, tonight." Another pause. "Thank you, David. I appreciate it." 40 seconds. That's all it took. She closed the phone and slipped it back into her handbag. Gerald stared at her. The laugh was gone. The bluster was gone. What was left was something raw. The look of a man hearing a sound he can't identify in the dark. "You're bluffing," he said. But his voice cracked on the second word. "Gerald," Eleanor said, and for the first time I heard something almost like sadness in her tone. Not for herself, but for him. For the version of her son she'd spent 20 years hoping would show up. "I have never bluffed a day in my life." She picked up her handbag. "You have 30 days. Or you let Sarah go to college. Choose." Let me explain something. David Mercer was Eleanor's real estate attorney. She hadn't called him on impulse. She'd consulted him 2 weeks earlier, right after Gerald had ripped up the first piece of mail from Penn State, an orientation packet, right in front of me at breakfast without a second thought. That was when Eleanor began preparing the paperwork. The eviction documents were already drafted. She was just waiting for Gerald to cross the last line. He crossed it with confetti on a dinner plate. Eleanor walked to the front door, then stopped. Turned back. Not to Gerald, but to me. "Pack a bag, honey. You're coming home with me tonight." I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just up. The way you stand when you've decided something and your body finally agrees. "Sit down," Gerald said. His chair scraped back. He was on his feet now too, one hand flat on the table, the other pointing at me. "You're not going anywhere." I looked at my father, not at his hand, not at the floor, at him, and for the first time in 9 years, I didn't drop my eyes. "I've been sitting down for 9 years, Dad. I'm done." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I genuinely think it was the first time anyone in that house had said no to him and meant it. I walked upstairs. My room was small, the smallest bedroom. The one with the window that didn't lock properly, and the ceiling stained shaped like a boot. My backpack, a faded blue JanSport I'd had since freshman year, was already half packed. Mrs. Kowalski had told me months ago to keep a go bag ready. Just in case, she'd said. At the time I thought she was being dramatic. She wasn't. I grabbed it. clothes, toothbrush, the SAT prep book, my journal. Then I reached into my biology textbook and pulled out the photo of my mother at the county fair. Cotton candy, laughter, a version of my life that cancer and Gerald had erased. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. Against my heart, Danny was standing in the hallway, 14 years old, still in his basketball jersey, eyes red. Sarah, I pulled him into a hug. He was almost my height now. I'm not leaving you, I said into his hair. I'm just leaving this. I went downstairs. Gerald stood at the bottom of the staircase, blocking the door. If you walk out that door, he said, and his voice was shaking now, don't come back. I walked past him. He didn't move to stop me. I think some part of him knew, had maybe always known, that the only thing keeping me there was the lock, and the lock had just been changed. Eleanor had the car running, headlights on, engine humming, the passenger door already open. Behind me, I heard Uncle Paul's voice, quiet, almost apologetic, but clear enough to carry. I'll bring the rest of her things tomorrow, Ma. It was the first time Uncle Paul had ever gone against Gerald in front of the family. It would not be the last. I got in the car, put my backpack on my lap, didn't look back at the house. Eleanor pulled out of the driveway, and for the first time in 9 years, Maple Street got smaller behind me. Eleanor's apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that overlooked the parking lot of a laundromat. It smelled like lavender and lemon dish soap, and something warm I couldn't name but recognized immediately. Safety, maybe. The absence of eggshells. She gave me the bed. I told her I'd take the couch. She told me she wasn't asking. I've slept on worse, she said, pulling an extra blanket from the hall closet. Your grandfather snored like a diesel engine for 41 years. A sofa is an upgrade. I lay in her bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and the voice in my head was not my own. It was Gerald's. You just destroyed your family. You're selfish. Who do you think you are? 9 years of his voice embedded in me like splinters. I could leave the house, but I couldn't leave that. A knock on the door. Eleanor came in with the mug of warm milk, sat on the edge of the bed, didn't say anything for a while. Then, your mother would be so proud of you tonight. That broke me. Not Gerald's cruelty, not the torn letter, not the walk past him at the bottom of the stairs, but those 7 words, spoken quietly in a small bedroom that smelled like lavender. I cried, not the silent, controlled tears I'd trained myself to produce. Real crying, the ugly kind, the kind I hadn't allowed myself since I was 8 years old. Eleanor held my hand and let me finish. Then she told me something I wasn't expecting. She'd opened a savings account in my name when I was 10, $200 a month from her teacher's pension, every month for 7 years. It's at $18,000 for $100, she said, as matter-of-factly as if she were reading a grocery receipt. Between that and the scholarship, you'll be fine for the first year. We'll figure out the rest. I wiped my face. Grandma, why didn't you do this sooner? She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she hadn't heard me. Because I kept hoping he'd change, she said finally. That was my mistake. Gerald didn't wait long. The calls started the next morning. Eleanor's phone rang at 7:15. She looked at the screen, silenced it, and went back to making toast. It rang again at 7:20, 7:31, 7:45. She let every call go to voicemail. Then he called me. My flip phone, the one he'd given me, the one he paid for, the one he probably thought gave him some kind of authority, buzzed on Eleanor's kitchen counter. I let it ring, listened to it vibrate against the laminate like an angry insect. When it finally stopped, I checked the voicemail. His voice was soft, almost unrecognizable. Come home, sweetheart. We can talk about this. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. Let's sit down like a family. I didn't answer. Just listen to his voice trying on gentleness like an ill-fitting coat. 2 hours later, the second call. The sweetness was gone. You're making a fool of yourself, Sarah. The whole town is going to know about this. You want people talking? You want that on you. The third call came at 9:40 that night. His voice was cold, flat. The Gerald I knew best. If you don't come back by Friday, I'm cutting you off completely. No phone, no insurance, nothing. You'll have nothing. He called Uncle Paul next. Paul told me later, quietly, almost ashamed, that Gerald had said, "You help them, you're dead to me." I mean it. On Tuesday, Gerald showed up at my school, walked into the front office and demanded to see me. The receptionist, a woman named Linda who'd worked there 20 years and did not care for men who raised their voices in her lobby, told him he needed an appointment. He didn't have one. Mrs. Kowalski was alerted. She pulled me out of third period history and walked me to her office through the back hallway. "He's in the building," she said, her hand on my shoulder. "You're safe. He can't get past Linda." That evening, Gerald posted on Facebook. I saw it because 3 classmates sent me screenshots within an hour. My daughter ran away because her grandmother is manipulating her. She's a confused teenager being used by a bitter old woman. Please pray for our family. 47 likes. 12 comments saying they'd pray. 6 saying stay strong, Gerald. He was rewriting the story with himself as the victim. And in a small town where everybody knew everybody, that story traveled fast. Small towns are beautiful until you need one to mind its own business. Within 3 days, the version of events circulating through Lancaster bore almost no resemblance to reality. Eleanor was the villain, a controlling grandmother overstepping boundaries, turning a teenage girl against her loving, hard-working father. Gerald was the victim, a widower, a single dad, a man who'd sacrificed everything and was being punished for it. A neighbor named Doris, the kind of woman who attended every funeral in town whether she knew the deceased or not, called Eleanor on Wednesday. "How could you do this to Gerald?" she said. "He lost his wife. Now you're taking his daughter." That poor man. Eleanor, to her credit, didn't hang up. She said, "I appreciate your concern, Doris. This is a family matter," and ended the call politely enough that Doris couldn't repeat anything damaging. At school, it was worse. Kids I barely knew stopped me in the hallway. "Is it true your grandma kicked your dad out? I heard you ran away. Are you okay?" One girl from my English class said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "My mom says your dad is heartbroken." I smiled, nodded, kept walking, but each comment was a small cut. And by Thursday afternoon, I had enough cuts to bleed. Gerald knew exactly what he was doing. He texted me screenshots of the Facebook comments, the sympathy, the prayers, the outrage on his behalf. Then one line, "See, everyone knows what you're doing is wrong." And for one terrible moment, sitting in Mrs. Kowalski's office with the door closed and my backpack at my feet, I believed him. Maybe I should just go back, I thought. Maybe he's right. Maybe this isn't worth tearing everything apart. Then Monday morning, something arrived at my father's door. Before I continue, I need to stop for just a second. We're seeing thousands of you watching this story unfold, completely invested in what happens next, but we're noticing that not enough of you have subscribed yet. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to stand up to someone who controlled your life, or if you know someone who has, please subscribe to this channel right now. Click that button. Join this community. We're telling stories that matter, and we need you here with us. Thank you. Now, let me tell you what happened Monday morning. The process server was a man named Phil who drove a gray Honda Civic and had the emotional range of a filing cabinet. He knocked at 8:15 in the morning. Gerald opened the door in his work boots and undershirt, a mug of coffee in his hand. Coffee he'd made himself for the first time in over a week. Badly, according to Danny, who told me about it later. Phil handed him the envelope. Gerald signed. Phil left. Inside, a 30-day notice to quit, issued pursuant to Pennsylvania Consolidated Statutes, Title 68, Section 250.501. Property address, 114 Maple Street, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Owner, Eleanor Margaret Mitchell. Occupant, Gerald R. Mitchell. The notice informed Gerald that he had 30 days to vacate the premises or face a formal eviction action filed with the Magisterial District Court. It was real. It was legal. It was happening. Gerald called Eleanor immediately. I know, because I was sitting at her kitchen table eating cereal when her phone rang and she put it on speaker. You can't do this to your own son. His voice came through distorted, the way sound warps when someone is screaming into a small microphone. I gave you a choice, Gerald, Eleanor said. She was holding her coffee with both hands, looking out the window at the laundromat parking lot. You made yours. She hung up. Gerald went looking for a lawyer. In a town our size, the options were limited. The first attorney he called, a woman named Janet Polk, declined. Conflict of interest, she said. She'd already consulted with Eleanor on a separate matter years ago. The second lawyer, a man 2 towns over, agreed to review the case. After looking at the deed, the tax records, and the complete absence of any lease or written agreement, he told Gerald the truth. If the deed's in her name and there's no lease, you're a month-to-month tenant at best. She has every right to do this. That same evening, Danny called me from his friend's phone. His voice was small and careful, the way you talk when someone is sleeping in the next room and you don't want to wake them. Dad hasn't cooked once since you left, he whispered. He doesn't know where the plates are. That night, Eleanor and I sat on her sofa with mugs of chamomile tea, and she told me the truth. The whole truth. The version she'd been carrying for decades. Your grandfather, she began and stopped. Took a sip. Started again. Harold was a good provider. People liked him. But behind our front door, he was a different man. He decided what I wore, where I went, who I could talk to. I wanted to teach. I had the degree. I had the certification. But he said a wife's place was in the home. She looked at her hands. I lost 15 years waiting for him to change his mind. She didn't teach until Harold died. She was 51 years old on her first day as an elementary school teacher. 51. When I saw Gerald doing the same thing to Catherine, I thought I was watching a rerun of my own life, Eleanor said. Her voice thinned. I told your mother to leave. She said I can't. He'll take the kids. Eleanor's voice broke just slightly. She was right. Probably. And then she got sick, and it didn't matter anymore. The house, she explained plainly, had been purchased after Harold died. His life insurance paid out, not a fortune, but enough. Eleanor combined it with her teaching savings and bought the house on Maple Street outright in 2004. Gerald had just lost Catherine. Danny was 5. I was 8. He needed stability, and she gave it to him. Rent-free. No questions asked. But she never transferred the deed. I told myself it was because the paperwork was complicated, she said. That was a lie. The truth is I knew. I knew who Gerald was becoming. And I kept that deed because somewhere in the back of my mind, I believed that one day I might need it. She was right. It just took 18 years. She reached under the sofa cushion and pulled out a manila folder. Property tax records. Every year. All 22 of them. Her name on every receipt. A printout of an email from David Mercer confirming the title was clear. Then she said something that made the room go very still. There's one more thing. Your mother left you a letter. I asked about the letter. Eleanor shook her head. Not yet, sweetheart. When you're ready. I wanted to argue, but something in her face told me she'd been guarding that letter for 9 years, and she wasn't going to hand it over at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. She'd know the right moment. She always did. So instead, we prepared. David Mercer's office was above a hardware store on Main Street. He was a calm, gray-haired man in his 60s who spoke in complete sentences and kept a framed photo of his golden retriever on his desk. Not the kind of lawyer you see on television. The kind you actually need. He walked us through everything. The deed was unambiguous. Eleanor was the sole legal owner. Gerald had no lease, no rental agreement, no written promise of any kind. Under Pennsylvania law, he was what's called a tenant at will, someone occupying property with the owner's permission, which the owner could revoke with proper notice. The 30-day notice has been served, David said. If he doesn't vacate, we file for eviction with the Magisterial District Court. A hearing will be scheduled within 10 days of filing. He looked at me. How old are you, Sarah? 17. I turned 18 in July. He nodded. Your grandmother can serve as your financial sponsor for Penn State. Once you're 18, your options expand further. Mrs. Kowalski, meanwhile, had been working the other side. She contacted Penn State's admissions office to confirm my acceptance was still active. Gerald hadn't managed to withdraw it because they required my signature, which he didn't have. The financial aid office walked us through the numbers. Eleanor's savings plus the scholarship covered year one with room to spare. Mrs. Kowalski helped me file a FAFSA with a dependency override, supported by a letter she wrote herself documenting my home situation. For the first time, my future wasn't a dream someone could tear up at a dinner table. It was a file, a folder, signatures, stamps, numbers that added up. For the first time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was filing paperwork. Gerald did not go quietly. He found a lawyer, a man named Craig Weiss from a town 40 minutes away, the kind of attorney who took cases on contingency and asked questions later. Within a week, Weiss filed a response to the eviction. Gerald claimed adverse possession and cited a verbal agreement in which Eleanor had allegedly promised to transfer the house upon his retirement. There was no such agreement. I never said that. Eleanor told David Mercer with the same calm she applied to everything. Not once. Not ever. But Gerald wasn't relying on truth. He was relying on delay and intimidation, two things he'd been perfecting his entire life. Weiss sent a letter to Eleanor suggesting she was being unduly influenced by her granddaughter. The letter used the phrase potential elder exploitation and hinted that Gerald might contact the Department of Aging if Eleanor didn't reconsider. Gerald did exactly that. He called the county's area agency on aging and reported that his 72-year-old mother was being financially manipulated by a minor. A caseworker came to Eleanor's apartment on a Thursday afternoon. Her name was Beth, and she was thorough. She interviewed Eleanor alone for 45 minutes, reviewed the deed, the bank records, the correspondence with David Mercer. She asked Eleanor 3 times in 3 different ways whether she was being pressured by anyone. Eleanor answered each time the same way. I am of sound mind. I have my own attorney, and I am making this decision freely. Beth closed the case the same day. Her report read, no evidence of exploitation. Client is alert, oriented, and represented by counsel. That Friday night, Gerald showed up at Eleanor's apartment at 11 o'clock. He pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the chain lock. You're going to regret this, Ma, he shouted. Both of you. Eleanor called the police. They arrived in 9 minutes. Gerald was escorted to his truck and given a verbal warning. A report was filed, incident number and all. He drove away. I stood in the hallway behind Eleanor, my hand on the wall, and told myself the truth. He wasn't fighting for his family. He was fighting for control, and he was losing it. There was something Gerald didn't know, something my grandmother had been carrying for 9 years, waiting for the right moment. And that moment came on a Saturday morning when Danny called me, whispering so fast I had to ask him to slow down twice. I found something, he said, in Dad's desk, the bottom drawer, the one he keeps locked. He left the key in his jacket and I looked. What Danny found was a manila folder. Inside it, every piece of college mail that had ever been sent to me. Not just the Penn State acceptance. There were letters from Temple University, a brochure from the University of Pittsburgh, a SAT score report I'd never seen. All of it intercepted from the mailbox over the past year, shoved into a drawer, and locked away like evidence of a crime. My father hadn't made a rash decision at a dinner table. He'd been systematically erasing my future for months. Danny took photos with his friend's phone and sent them to me. I sat on Eleanor's couch and scrolled through image after image. Envelopes with my name on them. Opened. Read. Hidden by the man who was supposed to protect me. And then, at the bottom of the folder, Danny found something else. A congratulations card. Addressed to me. Postmarked 8 years ago. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The return address was in Philadelphia. It was from my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. The woman Gerald told me wanted nothing to do with us after the funeral. The woman he said had moved on and forgotten about you kids. She'd written, "Sarah, honey, congratulations on starting high school. Your mama would be so proud. I think about you every single day. Love, Aunt Patty." 8 years. He'd kept her from me for 8 years. "I don't want to be like him, Sarah," Danny said, and his voice broke on my name. Gerald did not vacate the house. 30 days came and went. He stayed on Maple Street like a man who believed that stubbornness was the same as a legal right. So Eleanor and David Mercer filed for formal eviction with the Magisterial District Court, and a hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. The courtroom, if you could call it that, was a small room in the municipal building off Route 30. Fluorescent lights, wood-paneled walls, an American flag in the corner that leaned slightly to the left, 5 rows of wooden benches for spectators, a raised desk for the judge. No jury, just people and paper. Gerald sat on the left side with Craig Weiss. He was wearing a dress shirt, light blue, ironed, the first time I'd ever seen him in anything but flannel or a work polo. Khaki pants with a sharp crease, but his work boots peeked out beneath the cuffs, scuffed and familiar. And somehow that detail made me sadder than anything. Eleanor sat on the right with David Mercer. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, her silver hair in a low bun, her posture the kind of straight that comes from decades of standing in front of a classroom. She looked like exactly what she was, a retired teacher who had done her homework. I sat in the first row behind Eleanor, my hands in my lap, my backpack at my feet. Behind us, Uncle Paul, who had driven 40 minutes to be there. A few faces I recognized from town. People who'd seen the Facebook post, heard the gossip, and come to watch. The court clerk, a young woman with a laptop, recorded everything. The room was small, but it had an audience. And audiences change the way people behave. Or, in Gerald's case, the way they reveal themselves. Judge Morrison entered, a woman in her early 60s, silver reading glasses. No nonsense. She sat down, opened the file, and said, "Let's begin." Craig Weiss went first. He spoke quickly, building Gerald's case like a man stacking cards on a windy day. Gerald had maintained the property for 2 decades. Gerald had paid utilities. Gerald had invested significant sweat equity into the home. There was, Weiss argued, an implied agreement that Eleanor would eventually transfer ownership. Judge Morrison listened, did not interrupt, took notes. David Mercer stood up. He was quieter than Weiss, slower, and somehow more devastating for it. He presented the deed, filed with the county recorder's office in 2004. Eleanor Margaret Mitchell, sole owner. He presented 22 years of property tax receipts, all in Eleanor's name. He presented a title search confirming no liens, no transfers, no co-owners, no encumbrances of any kind. "Your Honor," Mercer said, "the deed is unambiguous. My client is the sole legal owner. There is no lease, no written agreement, and no evidence, written or otherwise, of a promise to transfer. Mr. Leland is, at best, a tenant at will. The 30-day notice was properly served. Judge Morrison turned to Gerald. She removed her glasses. Mr. Leland, she said, can you present any written document, a lease, a contract, a letter, anything at all, that shows your mother agreed to transfer ownership or grant you a permanent right to reside in this property? Gerald looked at Weiss. Weiss looked at the table. It was understood, Gerald said. He leaned forward. She's my mother. Mothers don't need a contract with their sons. Judge Morrison put her glasses back on. Mr. Leland, this court deals in documents, not assumptions. She reviewed the file for another 60 seconds. Then she ruled. Eleanor had the legal right to evict. Gerald was ordered to vacate within 15 days, reduced from 30 because, as Judge Morrison noted, Gerald had already been given the original 30-day notice and had chosen to ignore it. Gerald shot to his feet. His chair scraped back against the tile floor, loud enough to make the clerk flinch. This is insane, he shouted. She's doing this because of a girl who wants to go to school. The room went silent. Every person on those wooden benches heard it. Uncle Paul closed his eyes. The court clerk's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Judge Morrison stared at Gerald over her glasses for a full 3 seconds before saying, "Sit down, Mr. Leland." He sat, but the words were already out. And every person in that room understood exactly what kind of man was saying them. Did you hear what my father just said? In a courtroom, in front of a judge, in front of witnesses, because of a girl who wants to go to school. A girl wanting to learn. That was the emergency. The courthouse parking lot was half empty and too bright. One of those crisp fall mornings where the sun hits the asphalt at an angle that makes everything look overexposed, like a photograph with the contrast turned up too high. Gerald stood next to his truck, a rusted F-150 with a cracked taillight and a faded bumper sticker that read, "Support local business." He had his keys in his hand, but he wasn't moving. He was looking at Eleanor and me as we came down the steps, David Mercer holding the door behind us. "You took everything from me," Gerald said. His voice was different. Not loud, not mean, just hollow. A man standing in the rubble of something he'd built, not understanding that the foundation had never been his. Eleanor stopped on the bottom step. She looked at her son, her only son, and I saw something move across her face that I'd never seen before. Not anger, not satisfaction, something heavier. The weight of a woman who knew she was right and wished she didn't have to be. "I didn't take anything, Gerald," she said. "I just stopped giving." Uncle Paul walked up beside Gerald and put a hand on his shoulder. Gerald flinched, but didn't pull away. "You can stay with me," Paul said, "as long as you need. But you need to let Sarah go." Gerald didn't answer. He opened his truck door, got in, and drove off. No goodbye. No last word. Just the engine and the gravel and the shrinking red of his taillights. I watched him go. I waited to feel something triumphant. Some rush of justice. Some cinematic swell. It didn't come. What came instead was quieter. Not joy. Not sadness. Just space. A vast, unfamiliar openness where his voice used to be. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Pennsylvania area code, but not one I knew. I let it go to voicemail. Then Eleanor's phone rang. She pulled over into a gas station parking lot and answered. "Hello." Her face changed, softened. "Yes, this is Eleanor. Yes, she's right here." She handed me the phone. "It's your Aunt Patricia." I pressed the phone to my ear so hard I could feel my pulse against it. "Sarah." The voice was warm and cracked at the edges, like a mug you love too much to throw away. "It's Aunt Patty. Danny found my card and called me from his friend's phone. Baby, I've been trying to reach you for 8 years." I couldn't speak. Just sat there in Eleanor's passenger seat with tears running down my face while this woman I barely remembered told me everything. She'd sent letters, birthday cards, Christmas packages, every year for 8 years. Gerald had told her once on the phone, in a tone she said she'd never forget, that Sarah and Danny don't want to hear from you, and that she should respect the family's wishes. Then he blocked her number. I contacted a lawyer once, Patricia said, about visitation rights. But since I wasn't a legal guardian and Gerald wasn't technically denying access, just intercepting mail, there wasn't much I could do without proof. Her voice broke. I never stopped thinking about you. Not one day. Patricia lived in Philadelphia. She was a registered nurse at a hospital downtown. A nurse. The same career my mother had wanted. The same career Gerald had crushed before it could start. The coincidence sat in my chest like a stone. Your mom talked about you constantly, Patricia said. She wanted you to have everything she couldn't. She used to say, Sarah's going to be the one who makes it out. I was crying again. Freely this time. No swallowing. No hiding. No watching the door. Come visit before school starts, Patricia said. Philly's only 3 hours from Penn State. You'll have family close. Family. The word felt different now. Not a chain. A net. The night before I left for Penn State orientation, Eleanor sat me down on the edge of her bed. She was holding a small wooden box. Cedar. No bigger than a shoebox. With a brass clasp that had gone green with time. I was waiting for the right moment, she said. I think this is it. She opened the box and handed me an envelope. It was cream-colored, soft at the edges from years of being held and put back. Held and put back. My mother's handwriting on the front. Round letters. Careful. The kind of penmanship that belongs to someone who was taught by nuns. For Sarah when she's ready to fly. She wrote it during treatment. Eleanor said. She knew she might not, she stopped. Pressed her lips together. She gave it to me and said, give it to her when she needs it most. I've been carrying it for 9 years. I opened the envelope with hands that would not stay still. The letter was 2 pages long, written on lined notebook paper. The ink slightly smudged in places. Tear stains, I realized later. Some hers, now some mine. She didn't write about Gerald. She didn't write about cancer. She didn't write about regret. Or at least not in the way I expected. She wrote about me. She wrote about the morning I'd made her breakfast in bed when I was 7. Burnt toast and orange juice with pulp I'd tried to strain through a paper towel. She wrote about the time I'd memorized every constellation on a placemat from a diner and recited them to her in the backyard. She wrote about the way I laughed, which she said sounded like bells being shaken loose. And near the end, in handwriting that had grown unsteady, she wrote the line I carry with me everywhere. Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth, especially not the people who are supposed to love you. I read the letter 3 times. The first time through tears. The second time through something deeper. The third time because I wanted to hear her voice. And this was the closest I would ever get. Eleanor was crying too. Quietly. The way the women in my family had always cried. Like sound was something we'd been taught to ration. She asked me to wait until you were ready to fly, Eleanor said. I think you're ready. I held the letter against my chest and breathed. And for the first time, the ache of missing my mother didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a compass. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to pause for just a moment. If you've made it this far in this story, if you've been with me through every tear, every confrontation, every moment of standing up to someone who tried to keep me small, then you're part of something bigger than just watching a video. You're part of a community of people who understand what it means to fight for your own future. Please subscribe to this channel right now. We're building something here and we need you in it. Click that button and join us. Thank you. Let me tell you what happened next. Because the numbers matter. Numbers don't lie. and they don't change their story when someone starts crying. Gerald vacated the house on Maple Street 8 days before the court-ordered deadline. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on the other side of town. $750 a month. The cheapest he could find. He'd been living rent-free for 22 years in a house valued at approximately $210,000. The math on what that cost him to lose is the kind of calculation that keeps a man awake at 3 in the morning. He still had his plumbing job. He still had his truck. But the thing he'd lost, the kingdom, the throne, the illusion of authority built on a piece of paper that was never his, that couldn't be replaced with overtime. Eleanor kept the house. She didn't move back in. Instead, she rented it to a young family, a couple with 2 kids and a dog, for $1,300 a month. That income went directly into a second account earmarked for my education. Tuition for year 2 and beyond. Danny stayed with Uncle Paul during the school year. It wasn't ideal, but Paul was steady, and he'd finally stopped being afraid of his brother. Danny started seeing a counselor at school. Not because anyone forced him, because he asked. The town gossip machine, which had once churned in Gerald's favor, slowly reversed. People found out the truth in pieces. The deed, the eviction, the intercepted mail, the Facebook performance. Nobody apologized to Eleanor. Small towns don't do that. But the invitations to Gerald's side of the narrative quietly stopped. And Doris, the neighbor who'd called Eleanor to scold her, was seen bringing Eleanor a casserole on a Thursday afternoon without explanation. Gerald didn't lose his daughter because I left. He lost his daughter the night he ripped up that letter. 2 months into my first semester, my phone rang at 8:15 on a Wednesday evening. I was in my dorm room. Textbooks spread across my bed. A half-eaten bag of pretzels on the nightstand. The number was Gerald's. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, not forgiveness, not obligation, something I still don't have a word for, made me pick up. "I saw your name on the dean's list," he said. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Smaller, like it was coming from a room that had gotten too big for one person. I looked it up online. Your mother, she would have liked that. I closed my eyes. It was the first time he had mentioned my mother without using her as a weapon. And I didn't know what to do with that. This tiny, late, insufficient acknowledgement from the man who'd spent a decade teaching me that my dreams were a waste of his time. "Thank you for saying that, Dad," I said. "But I'm not ready to talk yet. When I am, I'll call you." I hung up, sat in the silence of my dorm room, and listened to my own breathing. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel the satisfaction people expect you to feel when the person who hurt you finally shows a crack in their armor. I just felt clear. Forgiveness isn't something I owe him. Maybe it'll come one day. Maybe it won't. But my education, my future, those were never his to take. Penn State in October is the kind of beautiful that earns its keep. The maples on the quad burn orange and red, and the air smells like wood smoke and possibility. And everywhere you look, there are people carrying books and coffee and the quiet assumption that they belong here. I belonged here. My dorm was a cinder block box on the 3rd floor of East Halls, shared with a girl named Rachel who talked in her sleep and kept a collection of succulents on the windowsill she'd named after Supreme Court justices. She was strange and kind, and the first friend I'd made based entirely on who I was, not who I was related to or what I could do for them. I declared pre-nursing, not because Aunt Patricia was a nurse, not because my mother had wanted to be one, but because somewhere between the burnt toast and the biology textbook and the 9 years of taking care of everyone but myself, I'd realized I was good at caring for people. And I wanted to do it on my own terms, for people who actually needed it, in a place where it counted. Eleanor called every Sunday night at 7. We talked about her week, my classes, the tenants in the Maple Street house, the weather, normal things. She never brought up Gerald, unless I did. Danny FaceTimed every Wednesday. He was growing. His voice was changing. He joined the track team at school, the first extracurricular a Mitchell kid had been allowed to do in a decade. Aunt Patricia invited me to Philadelphia for Thanksgiving. I went. She made my mother's stuffing recipe. I didn't cry. I just ate 2 helpings and asked for the recipe, and Patricia smiled like I'd given her something she'd been waiting years to receive. On my desk in the dorm, between a secondhand laptop and a stack of anatomy flashcards, I kept 2 things. The photo of my mother at the county fair, and her letter, pressed flat inside a clear plastic sleeve so the ink wouldn't fade. Nobody here told me I couldn't, and that still felt new. I'm not going to stand here and tell you what to do with your life. I'm 27 years old now. I'm still figuring out my own. But I can tell you what I learned. I learned that silence isn't loyalty. My grandmother was silent for 22 years because she loved her son and kept hoping he'd become the man she raised him to be. That silence cost my mother her dream. It almost cost me mine. Eleanor would be the first to tell you. Waiting isn't patience when someone is drowning. I learned that power doesn't have to be loud. My father shouted. He slammed doors. He controlled every room he walked into by making everyone afraid to breathe wrong. My grandmother sat quietly at the end of a dinner table and changed my entire life with a deed, a phone call, and 6 words: pack her bags and choose. She didn't save me with magic. She saved me with paperwork and patience. And I learned that leaving isn't the same as giving up. I didn't abandon my family when I walked out of that house with a JanSport backpack and a photo in my pocket. I left a system that was designed to keep me small. And the moment I stepped outside, I started growing. Let me tell you what happened in the years after that courtroom. Because the ending matters. Not just the dramatic moment. Not just the confrontation. But what came after. When the dust settled and we all had to figure out how to live in the world we created. I graduated from Penn State in 4 years. Magna cum laude. Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Eleanor was in the front row at graduation, wearing the same camel coat she'd worn to that Sunday dinner, holding a bouquet of flowers she'd bought from a grocery store because she said the fancy florists were highway robbery. Aunt Patricia came. Uncle Paul came. Danny came, 17 years old by then, taller than me, wearing a tie he'd borrowed from Paul because he wanted to look nice for his sister's big day. Gerald did not come. I hadn't invited him. 3 months before graduation, he'd sent me a card. Just a card, no letter. On the front, a generic congratulations message with gold embossed letters. Inside, he'd written, "I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I never said it when it mattered." Dad. I kept the card. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. Maybe because some part of me still remembered the man who taught me to ride a bike when I was 6, before my mother died, before everything turned cold and controlling. Maybe because forgiveness isn't a light switch you flip. It's a dimmer you adjust slowly, over years, and sometimes you never get it all the way to bright. I got my nursing license, took a job at Lancaster General Hospital in the pediatric unit, worked night shifts because they paid more and because I liked the quiet of 3 a.m. rounds, checking on sleeping children, adjusting for drips, charting vitals in the blue glow of computer screens. I was good at it. The kids liked me. The parents trusted me. And every time a scared mother asked me to explain a diagnosis or a treatment plan, I thought about my own mother and the nursing career she never got to have. I was living it for both of us. Danny graduated high school, got a partial scholarship to Millersville University, majored in education, wanted to be a teacher. Like Grandma Eleanor, he said. He lived with me for his first 2 years of college, sleeping on my couch in the 1-bedroom apartment I'd rented near the hospital, saving money, figuring out who he was when Gerald's voice wasn't in his head telling him who to be. We talked about our fathers sometimes. Late at night, after Danny finished studying, when we were both too tired to lie. Do you think he knows what he did was wrong? Danny asked me once. I think he knows, I said. I just don't think he knows how to fix it. Would you forgive him if he tried? I thought about it. Maybe. If he actually tried. Not just a card once a year. Real effort. Real change. But I'm not holding my breath. Danny nodded. Me neither. Eleanor turned 80. We threw her a party at her apartment. Small. Just family. Patricia came from Philadelphia. Paul brought his wife. Danny and I made a cake from scratch. Lemon. Her favorite, and it was lopsided and the frosting was too sweet, but she cried when she saw it. Happy tears, the good kind. I never thought I'd see this, she said, looking around at all of us. A family that actually likes each other. The Maple Street house stayed rented. The family who'd moved in, the Johnsons, with their 2 kids and their golden retriever, loved it. Took care of it. Painted the shutters. Fixed the porch railing. Made it a home in a way it had never been when Gerald lived there. Eleanor used the rental income to set up education funds for Danny and me. Anything left over went into a savings account she said was for emergencies or opportunities, whichever comes first. Gerald stayed in his apartment above the dry cleaner. He worked. He paid his bills. He showed up to family events when invited. Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, but always arrived late and left early. Always sat in the corner. Always quiet. I saw him at Eleanor's 80th birthday party. He brought a card and a gift, a framed photo of all of us from when I was 6, before Mom died. All of us smiling at a picnic table, somewhere I didn't remember. I found this in a box in the garage, he said, handing it to Eleanor. Thought you might want it. Eleanor looked at the photo for a long time. Then she looked at Gerald. Thank you, she said. Just that. Nothing more. He nodded and went to sit in the corner with his paper plate and his plastic fork, and I watched him from across the room and felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness. Not quite. But maybe the beginning of it. The recognition that he was human. Flawed. Broken by his own father the same way he tried to break me. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. And sometimes understanding is the first step toward letting go. When I was 25, I met someone. His name was Marcus. He was a physician assistant in the ER, calm under pressure, kind to patients, the kind of man who remembered nurses' names and said thank you when you handed him a chart. We started dating. Slowly, carefully, because I'd spent so many years learning to protect myself that letting someone in felt like defusing a bomb. He met Eleanor first. I brought him to Sunday dinner at her apartment, and she interrogated him the way grandmothers do. Where are you from? What do your parents do? What are your intentions with my granddaughter? He answered every question honestly and patiently. And at the end of the night, Eleanor pulled me aside and said, he's good. Keep him. I introduced him to Danny next. They bonded over basketball and terrible action movies, and the shared experience of having complicated relationships with their fathers. Then, 6 months into dating, Marcus asked to meet my father. You don't have to if you're not ready, he said. But he's part of your story, and I want to understand all of you. We met Gerald for coffee at a diner on Route 30. Neutral territory. Public. Safe. Gerald showed up in a button-down shirt. Clean-shaven. Hands shaking slightly as he shook Marcus's hand. We talked for an hour. Awkward at first. Stilted. Gerald asked Marcus about his work, his family, his plans. Marcus asked Gerald about plumbing, about Lancaster, about how long he'd lived here. I mostly stayed quiet, watching my father try so hard to be normal that it was almost painful. At the end, as we were leaving, Gerald walked me to my car. Marcus waited by his truck, giving us space. Thank you for letting me meet him, Gerald said. He seems like a good man. He is. I'm glad. Gerald looked at his hands. I know I don't have the right to say this, but I'm proud of you, Sarah. The nurse. The life you've built. Your mother would be, his voice broke. She'd be so proud. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. I'm working on it, he said. Being better. I started seeing someone. A therapist. Trying to understand why I did what I did. That's good, Dad. It doesn't fix anything. I know that. But I'm trying. I know. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Do you think someday you might? He stopped. Started again. Do you think there's a chance you could forgive me? I thought about it. About the letter ripped up on a dinner plate. About 9 years of being a housekeeper instead of a daughter. About my mother's stolen dreams and Aunt Patricia's intercepted cards, and all the ways he tried to make me small. But I also thought about the photo he'd given Eleanor. About the therapy he was doing. About the quiet, awkward effort of showing up to family events even when he knew he wasn't wanted. About the fact that people can change, even if it takes them 60 years to start. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. But it's going to take time. I understand. And it's going to take more than just showing up to birthdays and sending cards. It's going to take you actually dealing with what you did. Actually apologizing to Danny. Actually making amends, not just saying you're sorry. I'll do it, he said. Whatever it takes. We'll see. I got in my car, drove away. And for the first time in 10 years, I thought maybe there was a version of the future where my father and I could exist in the same room without me feeling like I was suffocating. Marcus and I got engaged a year later. Small proposal. Private. Just us and a hiking trail and a ring he'd saved for months to buy. We got married at a small chapel outside Lancaster. Eleanor walked me down the aisle. She wore her camel coat even though it was June and 80 degrees, because she said it was her lucky coat and she wasn't taking any chances. Aunt Patricia was my maid of honor. Danny was a groomsman. Uncle Paul gave a toast that made everyone cry. And in the back row, sitting quietly by himself, but there, present, trying, was Gerald. I saw him during the ceremony. Saw him wipe his eyes when Eleanor and I walked past. Saw him smile, small and sad and genuine, when Marcus and I exchanged vows. After the reception, he came up to me, handed me an envelope. You don't have to read this now, he said. Or ever, if you don't want to. But I needed to write it. I opened it later that night in the hotel room, still in my wedding dress, Marcus asleep beside me. It was a letter, 5 pages, handwritten, an apology, a real one. Not, I'm sorry you felt hurt, but I'm sorry I hurt you. He listed everything he could remember. Every rule, every control, every time he'd made me feel small. He wrote about his own father, about growing up in a house where men didn't show weakness and women didn't have opinions. About how he'd learned to control because he'd been controlled. About how he'd done to me what had been done to him. And how that wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. He wrote, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that you were right to leave. You were right to fight. You were right about everything. And I was wrong. I'm sorry I couldn't see that until it was too late. I cried reading it. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was honest. And honesty, after years of lies and manipulation, felt like oxygen. I'm 27 now. I work as a nurse. I'm married to a good man. I have a relationship with my grandmother that saved my life. I have an aunt who's become the mother figure I needed. I have a brother who's figuring out how to be a good man despite the example he was given. And I have a father who's trying, finally, after all these years, to be better. We're not close. We may never be. But we're civil. We're honest. And on holidays, when we sit around Eleanor's table and eat too much food and tell old stories, he's there. Not at the head of the table. Not making the rules. Just there as one of us trying to earn back what he threw away. That's my story. I didn't share it to tell you to forgive the people who hurt you. I shared it because I want you to know that you don't have to. That leaving is allowed. That protecting yourself is not the same as being cruel. That sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will fail you, and you're allowed to build a new family from the people who actually show up. If you're in a house where your dreams get torn up at the dinner table, I hope you find your Eleanor. Or maybe you are someone's Eleanor. And if you are, don't wait as long as she did. Use the power you have. Pull out that deed. Make the call. Save the person who can't save themselves yet. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. You are not defined by the people who tried to keep you small. You are defined by what you did when you finally got free. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. If this story reached you, if it reminded you of something in your own life, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to this channel. And if you want another story about families and secrets and the moment everything changes, click the link in the description. There's a story waiting for you about a woman who discovered her parents' dark secret by secretly living in their bedroom. You won't want to miss it.